Hello, NAAIA community. Get ready to relive insightful discussions, gain fresh perspectives, and be inspired by the wealth of knowledge our community has to offer. Let's dive into another episode.
My name is Dwight G. I am as Victor mentioned, a board member of NAAIA National and based in New York. I am pleased today to be moderating this webinar on the topic of cyber claims, life cycle of a cyber claim. And we have some really good panelists who are going to be discussing this. And I'm going to have them come in and introduce themselves. We'll start with the two ladies. Ashley, would like to let everyone know who you are.
Hi, good afternoon. Ashley Hunter. I am the Chief Underwriting Officer of a cyber MGA in Dubai, United Arab Emirates. And just happy to be here today.
Thank you. Janelle.
Hi, my name is Janelle Dwight G. I am an incident response claims specialist for a global insurance carrier.
Thank you both for being here. And Edmund Brown.
Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. I am Edmund Brown. I'm a founding partner of the law firm Pearson Ferdinand and a member of our cybersecurity and incident response practice group located in Columbus, Ohio.
Awesome. Thank you all for being a part of this panel. Looking forward to an entertaining and informative time. And with that being said, Edmund, I'm on you, so let's kick it off with you, if you don't mind. What's a cyber attack? And again, to the other panelists, feel free to jump in and say what you have to say. I also want to let the participants know that if you do have any specific questions, just indicate that in the chat. And if you're directing to a particular person, indicate that also. But Edmund.
Sure. We see a lot of different types of cyber incidents come across our desk. Some of them are run-of-the-mill spoofing attack, where a threat actor might be trying to harvest login credentials to get access to someone's email or IT environment. You have business email compromises, where they actually do access your Microsoft 365 or your Google email account and then gain access to the documents and information within your email account. There are also financial fraud incidents. A lot of times the threat actors will use the information that they obtain and the access to a particular system to facilitate fraudulent wire transfers and other fraudulent payment transactions, directing funds from a legitimate individual to the threat actor's bank account. We also see, and this is something that's come up recently and has been in the news a lot, ransomware incidents where the threat actors come in, they completely encrypt the IT environment and the systems and the servers, and they demand a ransom to either unencrypt the system and or in exchange for returning the sensitive information that they might have obtained during that attack. So we see all of those types of incidents almost on a daily basis in the practice.
And to add to that, other types of cyber incidents you might come across is when an employee sends a flash drive or a document that contains sensitive information to the wrong address, or an email that gets to the wrong patient. Say if it's a hospital employee and they have PHI, banking information of sensitive information, and they send that to the wrong individual, that might also fall within a cyber incident. So there's a variety of different incidents that occur that can fall within the category of a cyber claim.
Okay. So you're saying that you're seeing this a lot right now. Edmund mentioned that. So who are the people who are making the claims? Who are the insureds? Who are the people affected by this?
All of them.
Yeah.
all of my insureds are affected.
Yeah, I think it's across the board. I don't think there's any particular industry that's attacked more than others. I know right now healthcare is big. Um, Municipalities get hit often, so it's really across the board.
I'm
That we just
seeing
saw this week.
CP. I'm sorry, I was just saying I'm seeing CPA firms, financial services firms, broker dealers, etc. They're also prime targets for these types of attacks.
Yeah, I saw this week that there was one in the news involving a healthcare system. So it's like probably the biggest one.
Yes.
I don't remember the name of the healthcare company or health services company.
Yeah, I believe
But
it was Change, and they're affiliated with United Healthcare.
that's right. That's right.
And it was a ransomware attack. There was, terabytes and terabytes of data that were involved here, and it's really put it's created a situation where hospitals and medical service providers aren't able to validate a patient's insurance information and coverage, which has really crippled the nation's healthcare industry over the past couple of weeks. Now, I know the Department of Health and Human Services is currently investigating that incident to determine if, right now the initial impact is the processing of medical claims, right? What we don't know is if those terabytes of data also included uh, personal information or protected health information of these individuals, which would make it also susceptible to identity theft and fraud, in addition to the impacts on the health services market.
So let me ask you a question then, and I'll ask this. I'll start with Ashley, and then just you guys can certainly feel free to jump in also. What happens like when one of these cyber incidents occur, and you get that call saying, "Hey, listen, we just got attacked." What happens next?
Well, for us, we actually call our panel, right? So then I end up, contacting Janelle and whoever's on our panel to try to figure out what's been affected, how we can basically stop the bleeding from happening as quickly as possible. So that means, calling your forensic accountants. That's usually who we call first. Calling your forensic accountants, making sure that, if we have to engage an ethical hacker to figure out what's going on. So we usually just go straight to our panel and have them just start dissecting the claim.
Yeah, so when we get a call from an insured or from a broker advising of an incident, our first we'd have an outreach call with the insured just to figure out what's going on. How bad is the impact? Is it just encryption? Has data been exfiltrated? Are their business still able to operate? And those are kind of the initial questions that we ask, just so we can get a grasp of how bad the incident is. Then we will reach out to an on-panel breach coach or privacy counsel firm to have those initial calls to do a deeper dive into the investigation. We'll also retain a forensic investigation firm to participate on that call as well. We try to do it all in one, so the insurer doesn't have to repeat themselves over and over again. We're aware that it is a time-sensitive event, so we try to move that fast fairly quickly. And then once they're up and running, depending on if their systems are encrypted, if they need to engage with the threat actor, then we'll bring on a negotiator to start opening those conversations.
Okay. Edmund?
Ashley and Janelle are spot on. Typically, we're brought in along with a digital forensic incident response investigation provider to do an initial scoping call with the impacted insured. We kind of see what happened.
What was that title again?
Digital forensics and incident response firm, right? So these are your cyber investigators who are going to come in. They're going to remote into your system, into the insured system, and try to determine, who was in the system, how they got into the system, what they did while they were within the environment. Did they encrypt it? Did they send spoofing emails? Did they delete any messages? Did they obtain any sensitive information, accounting information, et cetera, and to make sure that this system has been secured, right? And then based on the results of that investigation, we can determine what next steps are necessary. If there is ransomware, as Janelle said, we might bring in a negotiator who is skilled in working through these ransomware events with the threat actors. If there's been data that's been exfiltrated or accessed by the bad guys, the threat actors, we might engage in e-discovery or data mining to review the data that was accessed and determine if there was personal information or protected healthcare information included in the data, and if so, to whom that information belonged, because there are ultimately potential notification obligations for individuals in different states. There are also state level and federal level regulatory notifications that have to be provided if certain information was compromised during the incident.
I want to, go into that a little bit also, but let me ask you this. I'm not in cyber, but I do know a little bit, enough to be dangerous and ask the right questions once in a while. So here's one of those right questions. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, these cyber attacks were like going against retail firms, right? They were going after credit card information, banking information, right? But now it looks like it has evolved. And now, you mentioned CPA firms, law firms. I have a friend who's an attorney who, his firm just got breached recently, hospitals, that kind of thing. So my perception is that now this thing is evolving and they're not just going after information to sell a credit card number. They want all types of personal identifiable information to now use and commit other misdeeds. Is that right?
I guess I can speak from from the region I'm in, right? The Middle East. It's easy to steal a credit card, and 99% of the credit card numbers are out there. So that's easy to come by. What most of our threat actors are trying to do is recreate the individual, right? So it's the information about the individual that is worth more than, let's say, a credit card or banking information. Because
Sure.
Once you have the information on the person, if you have their voice, if you have their fingerprint, you have all of the other things that you need. The credit card, that's useless because you can just get a new credit card because you have enough information on the individual to create the new individual. So yes, from our perspective, the banking information, yes, that is something that we worry about, but we're not really that concerned about the banking information. We're really more concerned about the holistic part of what the threat actor has actually ciphered off, because that's worth more to us and it's worth more to them than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's also a perspective, at least for the company itself, right? The threat actor has leverage, significant leverage against the company if they are able to obtain PII, protected health information, a significant amount of it. They know that a company might have to deal with litigation, they might have to deal with regulatory inquiries. So if they obtain a significant amount, they are likely to get a ransom payment for millions and millions of dollars in return of that information.
And just to piggyback a little bit, we're also seeing misdirected funds attempts, right? So if a bad guy, if a criminal can get into, let's say, your legitimate email account, and then they get access to legitimate invoices that you sent to a vendor or to a client, right? So a vendor sends you an email that has a legitimate, I have a case right now. The builder sent a invoice to the couple that is having a home built, but the bad guy got into the builder's email account. And from the builder's legitimate email account, they sent an invoice, but they changed the payment information. And they say to the client or the customer, hey, I need you to wire, we changed our bank, I need you to wire this money to our new bank account. And oftentimes that the parties are used to communicating via email, et cetera. And the client will wire the money to the bad guy's bank account. And if you don't catch it quickly enough, that money has been withdrawn from the account and you can't get it back. So that's another type of attack that you see, where they're not just necessarily looking for, your credit card now. They're actually trying to misdirect your payment, legitimate payments for legitimate services rendered. Or they might try to steal your tax information. If they can get your W-2, they know how much money you make. They know your social security number. They know where you're employed. They know your mailing address, and they can use that to facilitate a lot of types of frauds, including tax fraud. We've had incidents where folks have had their tax returns filed by the threat actor because the threat actor had information had access to their tax information. Just as an example.
Okay, all right, it's pretty interesting. And after the breach, and after you guys identify that, okay, this is what happened, we're dealing with this situation right now, and you may not know the exposure right away. I'm assuming you don't know the exposure right away, but you kind of know that, okay, they've been in the system now for a day, a week. So you kind of know how much information, the parameters of the information they're able to access, right? So on the carrier side, dealing with a claim, or on the side of the insured, what is the insured supposed to do? Because it seems like it's happening a lot more, and even with the best of intentions and systems, it's going to happen, right? Am I off base in saying that?
No, I think you're correct.
Okay, so what do you do as a member of the public, not in cyber, and this happens? You tell your carrier, what do you do next?
Well, a lot of times the insured lies on their application. So, I mean,
really?
They'll tell you, I mean, so unfortunately, when the claim comes in, you're very surprised that they do not have 24-hour real-time monitoring, or you're very surprised that it's not in cold storage, or you're very surprised that it's not being duplicated 4 times like you said it was on the application. So a lot of times you're having to play catch up, because a lot of your insureds really would like to have these things in place. But quite honestly, most of them, especially if they're SMEs, they don't have it in place. So then you do have that claim, and that claim is large. Well, it's significant enough for someone that's an SME, right? And then in which case, you're having to recreate the wheel, because you assume they have one thing and they don't have it. And obviously it's different between SMEs and corporate, right? Because corporate has a CTO, has they do risk mapping as far as cyber is concerned. But when you're talking about SMEs, a lot of time they do not have what's in place, and they hold a lot of information, and they provide a lot of third-party support to your corporate, right? Which is always an issue. So yeah, a lot of times you're basically having to play catch up, because your SME basically just said that there was a lot of things on that they had that simply don't exist.
Janelle?
So I just want to understand the question. Are you asking me what they should do after they know they have a breach and how they respond to it, or after the breach is over and they need
once they know they have a breach, they've reported it to the carrier, what do they do then?
So best advice is to engage the vendor. So get a breach coach online. Hopefully it's someone that you've had communications with before you've had an incident, so they're familiar with you, they're familiar with how your systems operate. You want the same with your digital forensics firms, right? It should hopefully be someone that you're familiar with, but if not, get someone in that's experienced and know what they're doing. Your breach coach is going to quarterback a lot of the work for you. They're going to advise you as to the forensic investigation and be that middle ground between the communications, because forensics is going to talk in very tech terms, and it might be hard to ingest and understand that information. So that's where the breach coach will assist in letting you know what is actually going on. In your carrier, we will also be able to assist you through that process and what stage you are in the investigation. What's also helpful is, after the investigation is done and you determine what information was potentially impacted, there's going to be 2 avenues, hopefully, potentially. You're going to have your notification requirements that you might have to send out if sensitive information is impacted. And then you're also going to have to determine how has this event impacted you financially. Are you experiencing business interruption? Have you experienced extra expenses in responding to that incident? And that's when you will have a conversation with your carrier about retaining a forensic accountant that will assist you in reviewing that data and preparing what we call proof of loss for reimbursement under your policy. So there's a lot of things that will happen in that regard. So hopefully you'll be able to recruit some funds. And then if you have to send out notifications, your counsel will be able to assist you with notifications to individuals and regulators and get you through that process. So it's a few steps.
Absolutely. And in addition, your breach coach, breach counsel, and the forensic firm that comes in to investigate the incident will advise you to do some kind of reactionary things like reset all your passwords, right, within the environment. So you want emails, other apps that you use for your computer, et cetera, just because usually that's what happened, right? The threat actor got access to your passwords or your environment. You got to change that to try to kick them out. Oftentimes, we want to make sure that you have MFA, multi-factor authentication, enabled on all of your devices and all of your apps and your email to make it harder for the bad guys to get in. Sometimes, you have to get rid of the device or the devices, and you have to obtain new devices because the devices have been compromised. Sometimes they've been encrypted, and without it in a decryption tool or key, you won't have access to that data. And we also oftentimes have to get out in front of the information. So, if your system has been compromised and you've had business interruption, your employees and your customers know it, right? So how do you inform them of the incident? Sometimes it's working through your breach counsel and maybe your communications department in crafting internal and external communications. There are also some of these incident response firms have crisis communications departments where they'll help you communicate with internally and externally to kind of steer the message with regard to the incident so that it doesn't take on a life of its own. So those are some of the initial steps that we take while the investigation and incident response is ongoing.
Are you required to notify all your customers? Like get the mass mail?
The classic answer is it depends, right? So it depends on whether the information has been accessed and or acquired, right, or exfiltrated. So each state and each jurisdiction has their own notification laws, right? And they defined what personally identifiable information means in that state, right? So Massachusetts has a different definition than Ohio. Ohio has a different definition than California. And you have to go through and say, okay, did the threat actor access the data? Okay, is this a state where if they did, is this a jurisdiction where accessing the data, personal information, or protected author information is access enough to be considered a breach of the security of the system, right? Or is it a state where the threat actor has to have exfiltrated or downloaded or otherwise acquired the data? So they, instead of just having access to it in your system, they were able to download it locally to their computer. There are some states that say you only have to provide notification if the data was actually downloaded or exfiltrated by the bad guy. So it's really a state by state, jurisdiction by jurisdiction analysis. These analyses apply overseas as well. So, and it's based off of the location of the insured, right? Where they were domiciled and where they had the data. It's also based off of the location of the individual whose data was compromised, right? So you might be operating in Dallas, Texas, but you might have a client in Bermuda. If your client in Bermuda's data was compromised, if their social security number was stolen, do you have to notify that person in Bermuda, right? And it's really a jurisdiction by jurisdiction analysis. And then there are other regulators, whether it's the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Office of Civil Rights, or the U.S. Department of Education, if you're talking about educational entity that receives federal funds, there are other obligations, notification obligations that different regulators at the state and federal level will also have. So it's a multi-layered review from the legal side to say, okay, if we did have this incident and we did have sensitive information compromised, what are our obligations legally at the local level and at the federal level, and sometimes at the international level?
Oh, for us, EU standards, you have to. That's GDPR, so that is a straight no. If you're breached, everyone must be notified. So there's no ifs, ands, or buts. Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Oman, and Kuwait have just put in laws to where they're going to follow how the UK and the EU handles privacy. So it will be an automatic. Everyone must be notified in the event of a breach. So typically, those countries will follow what EU or what EU will actually do, just because they have much.
It kind of seems that I think Ashley's frozen right there. It kind of seems that here in the U.S., there's what's missing is a federal component, like the law that says this is what you got to do in the standard in the event of a breach. Am I right in that?
Yes, I would say that's fair, unless you're like a healthcare entity, right? So if you're an educational entity and you're subject to FERPA, basically Student Records Protection Act, FERPA doesn't say that you have to notify the students and their families. It just says you have to put a note in their student file, and their educational record that their data was accessed, right? Where HIPAA, the Health Insurance or the Health Information Protection Act, they say, okay, you have to comply with your state notification obligations and you have to comply with HIPAA. A lot of states say, hey, if you comply with HIPAA, you don't have to comply with ours. So yeah, I mean, for an entity that's not regulated by like the Department of Health and Human Services or the U.S. Department of Education, there are no national standards, and you have to go by state, jurisdiction by jurisdiction. And to Ashley's point, yes, GDPR has a blanket notification requirement, but someplace like South Africa, you only have to notify if you do business in South Africa and an individual who is domiciled or lives in South Africa is impacted, right? So if I'm a CPA firm in Ohio and I filed taxes in the United States for someone who lives in South Africa, I don't have to notify that person in South Africa unless I have a business location and have registered to do business in South Africa. So it really is your breach counsel or your breach coach is going to advise you on all of your obligations and notification that you have to have. But in order to provide that advice, you have to have the underlying information of, okay, what did the bad guys get to? Did they actually access this data, right? Did they download it to their locally so they have acquired it and have it physically? And what was in it, right? If it was just old invoices with no banking information, no social security number, et cetera, that isn't personal information. And so you don't have to notify anybody, right? So it is a detailed analysis that has to be performed and then has to be documented on the back end so that should anybody come later, like the Department of Health and Human Service, and say, okay, what did you do in response to this incident? You have to have a paper trail that shows that you take reasonable action to respond to the incident as is required by relevant state and federal law.
I do want to just circle back because Ashley, I don't know if you were finished with your point before where you froze, so we didn't.
No, I did. I finished my point. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Now, I don't remember who was it mentioned this earlier with regards to, they have, I think you may have mentioned it, Edmund, about they having your voice while, like when they're taking your identity and your information, right? That being said, what do you think the impact of AI will be on this type of fraud?
And certainly it'll make it easier. So for instance, right,
Not easier for us.
No, easier for the bad guys, right?
Yeah.
So the bad guys are already trying to spoof and make your insured believe that they are legitimate, right? That when they send that phishing email, that it's a legitimate email that you should open and you should put in your login credentials, right? That when they send that misdirected funds email and they ask you to send payment to them, right? To their the bad guy's bank account, they want you to believe that it's coming from your legitimate vendor, right? And AI will only make that easier. It'll make it easier for the bad guys to impersonate the good guys and facilitate fraud, right? So one of the things that, and I'm sure Janelle and Ashley will talk about this shortly, is, you know, if there's a transaction where funds are sent, where there's a fraudulent fund transaction, and the money's sent to the bad guys, who's responsible for the loss, right? Is it the entity that got hacked that was supposed to receive the money, or is it the entity that sent the money out to the bad guy? Well, part of the obligation of the entity that sent the money out to the bad guy was to verify the payment instruction. So you receive an email from that you think is from one of your legitimate vendors. They're asking you to wire $500,000 to a new account. You have an affirmative obligation to pick up the phone and call that vendor to confirm that change in account information. A lot of times just responding to the email isn't sufficient because the email has already been compromised. That's how they're sending you the updated information anyways. So what happens if you go to call the phone number? You don't usually interact with your vendor via phone. You call and the threat actor has spoofed their phone number or spoofed the voice. AI creates just a whole nother level of opportunity to facilitate the fraud and convince the good guys that the bad guys are legitimate.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think we're not seeing the implications of AI and how it's going to impact the cyber industry just yet. I think it's going to definitely have a huge impact, but it's definitely coming, right? If you think about like ransomware, your MFA on your phone, right? There's all types of ways that people can get around it, and it's starting to become seen more, right? Threat actors are trying to figure out ways that they can bypass securities and systems. And so they can find ways for AI to assist in some SIM swapping and all these different type of tools that they use to bypass security provisions. I mean, more incidents will occur. So I don't think we've seen the implication of AI in cyber just yet, but it's coming, and it will have a huge impact, I think.
Anything to add, Ashley, or?
Nope.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
They articulate.
No, that's pretty interesting, and I'm hopeful that at some point the impact AI will have will also be on the side of good. We'll see. When we're doing the prep for this, I think Edmund, you may have been the one that mentioned. I'm not sure if it's you, so if it's not you, I apologize.
Yeah.
Cyber ambulance chases.
Yes.
Could you tell us a little bit about that? Because, we deal with insurance and we deal with claims, and, we know ambulance chase.
Yeah.
Ambulance chase.
There's a couple different kinds of loss, and I think Ashley and Janelle could maybe explain to you guys. I mean, of course, a lot of the folks on this call will understand the difference between the first party and third party loss, right? So the first party loss is, okay, the bad guy came in and we had business interruption and our money got stolen or something like that. That was our loss. Then you have the loss to the third party, right? In the situation where funds are misdirected, or a situation where I think a loss to most folks is the compromisation of their personal information, right? So you have these reporting obligations at the state and federal level. As an example, when you send the state of Massachusetts requires you to notify the Attorney General's office and a couple of other state departments anytime you have to provide a data breach notification to a Massachusetts resident. Okay. And then Massachusetts will then on the Attorney General's website post all of the data breach notifications that they've received. Right. So that becomes a public record that your entity has been breached. And there's other Department of Health and Human Services, Office of Civil Rights does the exact same thing. And there are law firms out there that track all of that. And if they see that, hey, you had a breach and you had to provide notice to 50,000 individuals, right? You can anticipate a prospective class action claim being filed against you as the insured, because they know that a significant amount of people have been impacted by this incident. They know you probably have insurance coverage, and they're going to file a claim and hope to go to mediation and get a settlement that pads the pockets of the ambulance chasers, right? And they got to pass on money to the class representatives, etc. But it's kind of like low-hanging fruit for these folks to go out, review the public information, and say, oh, XYZ Corp just had to notify 300,000 people that that they had a data breach and their social security numbers were compromised. Well, that's 300,000 potential victims with potential damages that they can pursue the insured for. And it's happening more and more.
And it goes up exponentially from there also, doesn't it? Because you're looking at the 300,000, who knows what else, what other things are going to be done, what they're actually going to be taking with that information, affecting those people and others. So
then the first thing they're going to do in discovery is ask for the policy limits.
Everybody asks for the policy limits.
Yeah, right. And then now they have their target point in mediation.
Yeah. Okay. So, all right, we have a few minutes left before we have to wrap it up, and we do want to take some Q&A, but I do want to ask, two questions. One, how do we prepare, like, as a public? Yes, we deal with insurance, but, and for those of us who don't know this, how do you prepare? How do you try to safeguard against this? And the next question I'm going to ask, I'll put it both out there right now, is give me a takeaway. Give me one takeaway from, what you think we should know. Janelle, go, please, lead us off.
Yeah, so I think whether you have insurance or don't have insurance, where you said, I think having a plan, know that a cyber incident is likely to happen. Whether it's something small, you misplaced social security information, so ransomware event. But having an incident response plan is key in how you respond, and make sure your team knows it as well. So that's knowing which breach coach, which law firm you reach out to, knowing what forensic team you reach out to, know what your IT team is supposed to do. Are they supposed to shut down their network, prevent lateral movements? So let's say one of your vendors has an incident. This is what we do. We get notification and then respond from there. The quicker you're able to respond to an incident, notify your carriers, contain the information that might be subject to unauthorized access, the better you'll come out on the other end of it. So I think having a strong incident response plan, making sure your IT and those high-level individuals know that plan or sign off on it will be a key in getting you through it.
Awesome. Ashley?
I would just say be suspicious. I think too often enough we think that the email is coming from the right person. Too often enough we think that the phone call is coming from the correct person. We're in insurance, so we are suspicious by nature. But I think, inherently people want to think that people are good. And you can, and in this case, you really cannot operate under that auspices that is how the rest of the world is working. So what I would do is just be suspicious and follow up. I hate talking on the phone, but I do call to follow up to make sure that this is what, who people are saying that they are. A lot of times you just have to get them on the phone just to make sure. And then I would just say one takeaway, read your policy form. We're changing them constantly. So read your exclusions.
Be guided accordingly. Good point.
Right.
Janelle,
I second everything. Yeah, I second everything that Janelle and Ashley said. Certainly, you need to have a strong IT support and backup if it's internal or if you have a managed service provider who's running your IT. You want to make sure that they're competent, right? So we have, I can't tell you how many different times we have a claim where the insured, the victim, has IT support, but it's like Bob's IT. You know what I mean? And Bob's IT hasn't implemented endpoint monitoring. Bob's IT hasn't performed regular risk analysis on the environment to see if there's any um, uh, um, deficiencies or easy access points. Bob's IT might not have implemented multi-factor authentication across your email environment and in your IT environment. And now you're like, the digital forensics folks come in and they read this list. Do you have this? Do you have this? Do you have this? And all your answers are no. And that IT guy who's on the call, who you've been paying, a couple grand a month or whatever, he's sick. And now he's scared of getting sued by you because of your loss. So certainly you need to have strong IT support. An incident response plan is essential. What do we do if this happens? Because it almost certainly will. You'll at least the bad guys will at least try, right? You want to perform regular risk analysis on your system, right? Don't just assume that your IT environment is secure, right? You have to take steps to make sure it's secure. And one of the things that you can do is implement endpoint monitoring that kind of tracks all of the logins to your system, and it will flag unusual logins. So if you're an entity that typically does business in the States, and somebody logs into your account from Siberia, right? Endpoint monitoring is going to flag that and isolate it and not let that person in until you validate. Now, you might have an employee who is out hunting Siberian tigers and they logged in remotely. Okay, great. They can give them access, but it catches it in case it's a bad guy. And then, as Ashley said, you got to be vigilant. So if you get a DocuSign email and you're not expecting a DocuSign email, don't just click on the DocuSign and sign in, right? Like, call, validate, do something to make sure that what you're receiving is legitimate. Don't fall for the okey doke. And I think oftentimes people want to go the easiest and the quickest route, and they make themselves victims and targets by doing so.
I had to laugh because I actually just did that the other day. I got a DocuSign and I wasn't expecting that. I clicked on it. And, oh, okay. And,
Yeah, when you click on it and you still don't see anything that you recognize, like a client, or give it a hard pause. And if you have a software program where you can report suspicious emails and it can scan the email to see if it's legitimate or not, absolutely do that. Err on the side of caution. It'll save you a lot of pain and a lot of inconvenience.
Well, I'm old school. I just ran around unplugging every machine.
Old school's the best school.
Okay. Janelle, I don't know if we'd gotten your takeaway when you were speaking earlier.
So my takeaway would be, if you do have insurance, lean on your carrier. They might have a good wealth of knowledge and even for proactive services that can help you assist you through an incident. Also, another tidbit that people sometimes don't know is that they go out and they get EDR tools, a bunch of tools for the system, and they don't make sure those tools are configured correctly for their system. So just to make sure, if you do go out and you're getting different tools that you've heard are good in different areas, make sure that those tools are configured to your system, because you might have them. If they're not configured, you're still going to be hit with an incident.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. Let me get into some of these questions. And thank you, everyone on this panel. Thank you for checking in. Let me go through some of these questions. There's a question here about how can someone with claims experience, when not in cyber, gain that experience? In other words, how do you get into cyber claims as an insurance professional? Are there certifications or designations that can make you a more marketable candidate?
I mean,
okay. No, go ahead.
Yeah, no. I mean, there are tons of certifications, but quite honestly, the best way to do it is to find someone that can get you in. That's obviously the easiest access point, right? Because all the certifications are just certifications, but if you have had no experience, or if no one's giving you the experience to actually handle a claim, the certification is just what it is. It's just that, it's a piece of paper.
Okay.
And there are other types of specialty claims. So if you have experience in specialty claims, that would probably be a good entry point or segue into cyber.
Okay, thank you. All right, Janelle, there's a question specifically for you. What different forensic firms do you use?
So we use a lot. Our panel list is big, but Mandiant is a good one. CrowdStrike, Kroll. Depending on what you're looking for. So some of the big ones like Mandiant are for really large corporations. If you are looking for someone with more federal experience, who have individuals on their team that have federal backing, knowledge, you might look for a company like Incura, Arete. We have a pretty large panel. We have smaller forensic firms are like really skilled with dealing with municipalities or smaller agencies, like PNG. So we do have a large list, and it really comes down, because of that, we look to the individual insured and their needs and, their price point, what they would be comfortable with, versus just picking one out of our head.
Thank you. There's another question for everyone. Can you explain ethical hacking?
Okay, well, from our ethical hackers on our panel are basically hackers that they've gotten in trouble. So they've been caught. They've either served time, but they've now been vetted by, usually for us it's the FBI, but they've been caught, like, let's say, doing something in the US or in Estonia, and they've gotten caught stealing stuff, but whatever, they've been able to flip and roll over, and the FBI has vetted them as an ethical hacker. So they're individuals that know the syndicates, so they know the other syndicates. And so for us, they are our negotiators. They negotiate with the syndicates because they're typically a known quantity at that point. And usually we get better terms if our ethical hackers will negotiate with the syndicate as opposed to us on the carrier side doing it. So they're just kind of our conduit. We use them a lot when it comes to like ransom requests.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Anyone else want to add to that? Or it sounds like you're a hacker that got caught.
It is a hacker that got caught, and now they're ethical.
Seeing the errors of their ways.
And some of that is your risk analysis, right? So they're the folks who will come in and see if there's vulnerabilities in your environment, right?
Yes.
And identify
them. Or they will, quite a lot of times we use them just to negotiate, because they are a known quantity on the web, and they have a presence as being a hacker in the past.
Okay. So here's another good question. Can you talk about what happens when an insured doesn't go with the panel and hires their own incident response? As well as what can I do as a broker to help the insured go with the panel as required by their cyber coverage?
So there's a lot of things that happen. But one of the main things why we always say use someone on panel, encourage insurers to go with someone on panel, is because they're vetted. We know that they've handled incidents, a lot of incidents, how they'll respond, that they're going to do the job that they need to do, get it complete timely and get out. What we tend to see when insurers go off panel, they incur a lot more costs. The vendors tend to take a lot longer to resolve an issue. They might start pivoting into other avenues that is not really focused on the event itself. And so it ends up becoming more work for the insured, more work for the breach coach, more work and more cost overall. Sometimes if it's the legal counsel and they've gone off panel with, depending on the type of firm that they go with, they don't have the breadth of knowledge that Edmund would have, like an on-panel breach coach would have, to understand your company is in California. These are the regulatory requirements for the state. And you have a client or customer in Florida. This is the type of notifications you need to provide here. And so they tend to do all that legal research on the backs of our insured and trying to gain that knowledge. and it is all at the cost of the insured. So we really do push for our insureds to go on panel because it makes their life easier and it brings down their costs.
And I just say, from my perspective, go ahead, please.
Oh, sorry. No, we don't allow them off panel, but that is just, again, cyber policies are fairly new form in the region, so we do not allow them to go off panel.
And I was just going to say, it simply creates coverage issues on our end, and it delays the incident response, right? So it's now it's, I think Janelle said it well. Now it's more work for everybody, right, to coordinate. And the worst thing that can happen, one of the worst things that can happen is, a denial of coverage or denial of some of these costs. And a lot of the cyber policies that I've seen, it's about putting you back into the position you were prior to the incident, not improving your environment. And those costs that you're incurring to improve your environment are borne by you, the insured, and not the carrier. And a lot of times, if it's an off-panel forensics firm, they're going to make a lot of recommendations to you that might benefit the insured going forward. It'll definitely benefit the incident response firm by providing these add-on services, but the services are beyond the scope of the coverage.
Okay. Here's another question. What is the average cyber claim payout for small businesses in the industry? Are cyber claims a frequency or severity issue? That last part, man, I don't know. I mean, I think it's definitely a severity issue when somebody has your information, but what's the average payout?
Well, for us, our average, we don't receive a lot of claims just given where we are, so I cannot speak to this.
Okay.
Yeah, that's not something I could speak to as well. That's more of a underwriting question.
Is it fair to say it's also confidential?
Yes.
No, I mean, no, to be quite honest with you, I mean, in the industry, everyone knows what everyone's book looks like, right? I mean, and quite honestly, if you're in the cyber underwriting world, everyone knows that everyone is trying to find other regions to unload cyber capacity, because quite honestly, the claims are severe and they are frequent in the states. So if you're a carrier, you're not trying to unload more capacity there. That is a known thing. But quite honestly, it depends on the industry. It depends on like how many records they're holding. So, I mean, Net Diligence puts out a cyber claims inventory every year. And that's what I would recommend everyone look at if they want to know what the average claim payout is, because all of the major carriers put into that repository, and then Net Diligence actually puts out something annually.
And I'll just say that it's going to vary based off the type of incident, right? So, I mean, you can generalize, I'm sure, right? But a misdirected funds incident is way different than a regular business email compromise. A situation where your IT environment was accessed, but there wasn't any personal information or protected healthcare information is way different than a situation where there was sensitive data that was accessed or exfiltrated and there's a notification requirement. Covered entities under HIPAA have different obligations than entities that are not HIPAA regulated. So there's just so much variation in terms of the types of claims that occur. I think it'd be hard to really generalize, just in my experience, but I have never looked into the issue. So it's probably a good thought exercise for me to do after this call.
Thank you for watching this flashback episode with NAAIA. We appreciate your time and hope you found the insights valuable. Stay tuned for more enriching content. Until next time, thank you for being a part of the NAAIA community.